They say silence can be louder than any confession. And in a congressional hearing that was supposed to be routine, that silence became deafening. Cameras rolled as the FBI director sat under oath, his jaw tight, his words careful, his pauses calculated. Then came the question no one expected to hear spoken in public, one that would drag buried names, secret files, and the ghosts of Jeffrey Epstein's world right into the spotlight. The room froze. Because this time it wasn't rumor, it was record. According to victims who worked with the FBI, there are documents, real, physical FD 302 CEFs detailing at least 20 powerful men Epstein allegedly trafficked women to, bankers, politicians, billionaires, a royal, a rock star, a magician. These aren't whispers from the internet, these are statements locked inside federal files that have been sealed away for years. When Representative Thomas Massie read those words aloud, you could almost feel the air change.
Pages of Epstein files dwarfs the 70-odd pages of Epstein grand jury materials.
Without objection, the gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Patel, I watched some of your Senate hearing yesterday when Senator Kennedy asked you, you've seen most of the files, who, if anyone, did Epstein traffic these women to besides himself? You replied, according to the transcript, there is no credible information that he trafficked them to anyone else. You also said somewhere in the hearing and here today that the problem is that the case files are constrained by limited search warrants from 2006 to 2007 and that the non-prosecution agreement hamstrung future investigations. Those constraints only apply to Southern District of Florida. They do not apply to Southern District of New York, the location of the 2019 sex trafficking indictment, which produced many things, including a series of FD 302 documents. According to victims who cooperated with the FBI in that investigation, these documents in FBI possession, your possession, detail at least 20 men, including Mr. Jess Staley, CEO of Barclays Bank, who Jeffrey Epstein trafficked victims to, victims including minors, such as Virginia Roberts Giuffre, may she rest in peace. That list also includes at least 19 other individuals, one Hollywood producer worth a few $100 million, one royal prince, one high-profile individual in the music industry, one very prominent banker, one high-profile government official, one high-profile former politician, one owner of a car company in Italy, one rock star, one magician, at least 6 billionaires, including a billionaire from Canada. We know these people exist in the FBI files, the files that you control. I don't know exactly who they are, but the FBI does. Have you launched any investigations into any of these people, and have you seen these 302 documents?
Sir, I have asked my FBI agents to review the entirety of the Epstein files and bring forth any credible information. And we're working with Congress not only to divulge that information and produce it to you, but any investigations that arise from any credible investigation will be brought. There have been no new materials brought to me launching a new indictment.
So is the loophole here, or is it your assertion that these victims aren't credible, that the 302s maybe didn't produce credible statements that rise to a probable cause?
It's not my assertion, sir. It's the assertion of two different United States attorneys' offices from 3 separate administrations who investigated those same materials in lifetime.
Are the 302 documents in the FBI's possession?
They reviewed all that, yes, sir.
And so have you reviewed those 302 documents where the victims name the people who victimized them?
If I personally know, but the FBI has.
So how can you sit here and in front of the Senate and say there are no names?
I said
I named one today.
I said we are not in the practice at the Department of Justice and FBI of releasing victims' names. That is not what we do. We are also not in the habit of releasing incredible information. That's not what we do. But multiple authorities have looked at the entirety of what we have.
Okay, I got to move on here. Were you present when the AG had the White House event when she released the binders to the social media influencers?
I was, yes.
So if you're willing to meet with social media influencers who stood to benefit from the sensational and sad stories of these victims, will you meet with the victims as well?
The FBI will meet with anyone who has new information.
Will you personally meet with them?
the FBI and the professionals who are handling the cases will.
Were you instructed that it was important to release the documents to the Oversight Committee on the day of my introduction of the discharge petition to release these files?
I don't know what day that was, so no.
Well, they were released that day, and there were victims' names who weren't redacted because they were in such a rush, and the victims are not happy about that. Have you investigated any of the CIA connections? Have you seen the CIA file on Jeffrey Epstein? And if you wanted to see it, would they show it to you?
Well, I can speak for the FBI, and that's presuming there's a CIA case file, and I've reviewed everything that the interagency, not I, the FBI, that was provided to us.
Would you be willing to look at the CIA file on Jeffrey Epstein?
If there is such a file, and if it has not already been turned over to the FBI will look at any new investigative leads.
Have you made any progress on the...
It wasn't supposed to happen on camera, but it did. The list as described by victims includes one Hollywood producer worth hundreds of millions, a royal prince, a top figure in the music industry, and at least 6 billionaires, including one from Canada. Even Jess Staley, then CEO of Barclays Bank, was named. And yet when Massie asked the simplest question, have you launched any investigations into these people, the FBI director dodged. He looked straight ahead and said, we are reviewing all credible information, not denial, not confirmation. Just words designed to mean nothing and everything at the same time, because that's the pattern, isn't it? When power is cornered, truth becomes paperwork. It gets redacted, deferred, classified, under review. And while the cameras catch the questions, the answers always seem to vanish behind closed doors. But this time something was different. This time the names weren't coming from tabloids or anonymous leaks. They were being read into the congressional record, live. Moments later, Massie submitted 4 documents for the record. One linking Epstein to intelligence agencies, another quoting a bodyguard warning about his CIA ties, a third revealing meetings with high-level officials, and a Wall Street Journal report connecting Epstein to a former Israeli prime minister and intelligence chief. Each piece fit into a picture everyone has tried not to see. Even the chairman's gavel couldn't hide the tension. Lawmakers shifted in their seats, some glancing at each other like they'd just witnessed a line being crossed. And that's when the game changed. What had started as an oversight hearing became a confrontation with the intelligence world itself. Massie pushed forward, demanding to know whether the FBI had ever examined the CIA's Epstein files, if such files even existed. The director's response was clinical. If there is such a file, and if it hasn't been provided, we will review it. 2 ifs, 1 answer. A masterclass in evasion. He was equally vague when asked whether he'd personally read the 302s, the same documents victims say contain the names. Not personally, he said. But the FBI has. Think about that. The man in charge of the nation's top law enforcement agency admits he hasn't read the very files that could expose one of the most powerful trafficking networks in modern history. Instead, he points to multiple offices that already reviewed them and found no credible evidence. The key word credible, because credibility is a convenient filter when the truth threatens to burn down institutions. The congressman pressed again. So are these victims not credible, or is the evidence too sensitive? The director leaned back. It's not my assertion, sir, he said carefully. It's the assertion of multiple U.S. attorneys from 3 administrations. Translation: the system has already decided what you're allowed to believe. And that, more than anything, is what made this exchange so explosive. Because what happens when every road toward truth ends in the same dead end? No credible information. Behind those sterile words lies a pattern that's haunted this case from the start. Years earlier, former Labor Secretary Alex Acosta admitted he was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone. That was before the world knew about the island, the flights, the private safes full of photos. If a U.S. official was warned off because Epstein was tied to intelligence, what does that make him, a criminal, or an asset? And if it's the latter, was this ever truly an investigation, or just damage control? Even now, after Epstein's death and the endless headlines, nearly every major file remains sealed. 100,000 pages, according to Judge Engelmere's ruling, dwarfing the few dozen pages ever released publicly. Victims have testified, again and again, that they named names. They identified the men who exploited them. Yet each time the system claims it found no predicate for investigation. That phrase, so bland, so bureaucratic, has become the final wall between accountability and impunity. And through it all, Patel's demeanor never cracked. When asked if he would personally meet with victims, he redirected, "The FBI will meet with anyone who has new information." When asked about the unredacted release of victims' names, he blamed a Russian document production. When asked about progress on unrelated investigations, the January 6th pipe bombs, the Las Vegas shooter, he promised to get back later. It wasn't testimony, it was containment. Every word designed to protect process, not people. Because to the institutions, victims aren't human beings, they're variables. They are data points to be assessed, verified, and eventually archived. But to the public, they're the only reason this case exists at all. They're the ones who risked their lives to speak, who faced threats and disbelief, who were told their pain wasn't credible because it implicated the wrong people. And in that hearing room, as those questions hung in the air, their absence felt louder than anything said on mic. The deeper truth is that Epstein's story stopped being about one man years ago. It became a mirror reflecting how power protects itself. The same names appear again and again across different industries and nations: finance, entertainment, politics, intelligence. The same pattern repeats: exposure, outrage, silence, forgetfulness. The machine resets, and life moves on, except for the people it destroyed. So when the FBI director says he hasn't read the documents, maybe that's the point. Plausible deniability keeps everyone safe, everyone except the victims. It's easier to claim ignorance than to confront the network that allowed a predator to operate for decades, and easier still to hide behind phrases like ongoing investigation, a term that means nothing ever ends. But here's what makes this hearing different. It's now part of the record. Every deflection, every hesitation, every document introduced, it's all there, preserved in the official transcripts. For the first time, members of Congress publicly acknowledged the existence of Epstein files tied to intelligence connections and high-profile men. That can't be unseen. And the internet, unlike Washington, doesn't forget. Still, there's a reason no one in that room said the names aloud. Everyone knows the cost of crossing certain lines. The power Epstein kept company with didn't vanish when he did, it just adapted. It hides behind corporations, governments and institutions that prefer the myth of isolated evil over the reality of systemic corruption. The truth is dangerous not because it's false, but because it's provable. And that's why this exchange matters so much. Because for a brief moment, the curtain slipped. Viewers saw what accountability looks like when it's cornered. Calm, polite, rehearsed avoidance. They saw a government official carefully choosing words that protect his career more than the truth. They saw how easy it is for institutions to label evidence not credible simply because acknowledging it would shake the foundations. The real question isn't whether those names exist. The real question is, who gets to decide which truths the public deserves to know? If justice can be filtered by power, is it still justice or just management of outrage? And maybe that's why people keep watching hearings like this, because deep down, everyone senses the imbalance. The powerful play by different rules, and the same system meant to hold them accountable now shields them instead. It's not about one case or one director, it's about a culture built on selective blindness. As the session drew to a close, Massie's frustration showed. He had more questions, more documents, but limited time. The gavel fell, and the committee moved on to the next item, as if the last hour hadn't peeled back the edge of something monumental. Cameras shut off. Reporters packed their bags, but online, the clip spread fast. Viewers replayed the moment the director paused, the moment his eyes darted before answering. The internet caught what the official record tried to bury, the hesitation of a man who knows more than he can say. And that's the power of transparency, even in fragments. Once the public sees hesitation, they start asking why. Once they ask why, walls start cracking. Truth doesn't disappear, it waits. Every hearing, every leak, every document declassified adds another thread. Sooner or later those threads weave into something the establishment can't ignore. Session when silence becomes the default language of power, asking questions becomes an act of resistance. When no credible evidence becomes the mantra, evidence itself becomes revolutionary. And that's why this story refuses to die, because it's not about what happened to Epstein, it's about what's still happening around him. The question now isn't who was on the list, it's why the list still needs protecting. Why, after all these years, does accountability end where influence begins? Why do victims keep reliving trauma while the names stay sealed under national security? If the truth threatens institutions, maybe the institutions are the problem. And if you're wondering why this keeps cycling: hearings, outrage, silence, it's because exposure alone isn't enough. What changes things is pressure, public, relentless, informed pressure. Every view, every share, every person who refuses to stop asking forces the system to move. That's how buried truths surface, not through permission, but persistence. So as this story unfolds, remember what you saw in that hearing room wasn't just bureaucracy, it was fear. The fear of what happens when secrets lose their power, because once truth is public, it can't be controlled. Maybe that's why the silence felt so loud. And if you believe that power shouldn't decide what counts as credible, if you believe accountability shouldn't depend on wealth or status, stay informed, stay curious, and never stop asking. Because truth doesn't hide, it's buried. And together we can dig it up. Don't forget to subscribe, hit like, and turn on notifications so you never miss the stories that others are too afraid to tell. This isn't the end, it's just the part they didn't want you to see.